We can now bring in Tim Willasey-Wilsey, Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. This war has now entered its fifth year. Where do things stand on the battlefield at this point in time, and who has the upper hand?
Well, traditionally, people have been saying that Russia has the upper hand, but as your reporter said, the Starlink episode has allowed Ukraine to take back some territory. But no, I mean, when we're thinking about the upper hand, we must remember that when this started, Putin wasn't looking to just win the provinces of the Donbass. He wanted the whole of Ukraine. That's why he invaded north of Kiev. And of course, he was resisted and defeated, actually contrary to the assessment of many Western intelligence agencies that thought that Russia would easily overcome Ukraine forces. So it's been a massive failure by Putin. And yes, there's at various stages on the front, Russia has the upper hand, and then at the moment, Ukraine has slightly the upper hand. But that's not the point. The point is, it's very, very important, firstly, that peace comes, because it's been a 4-year war, almost rivaling the length of the First World War, and an extremely bloody and unpleasant one, but not at any cost. And to award President Putin a victory for what has been a devastating failure would be a massive Western mistake.
Vladimir Zelensky says the conflict has not broken Ukrainians, but war fatigue has set in, hasn't it?
No, I don't think Ukraine has been broken at all. I mean, very interestingly, that the worst thing that has happened really to Ukraine is the devastation of its power generation over the last few months. And this has been, I think, the coldest winter, they say, in 20 years in Ukraine. So average normal Ukrainians are undergoing enormous hardship at the moment. But spring is coming, March and April, things will begin to improve. And I think we will see a deregulation, or at least a dispersal of Ukrainian power supplies, so that it's not so vulnerable to these missile strikes in future. So I think Ukraine has actually overcome the worst. This winter has actually been the worst of all.
But every winter we see Russia go ahead and target Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure. That's not something new.
It's not, but it's been a particular focus of this last winter. Going after really the economic economic targets, and particularly the power sector target, to try and wear down Ukrainian morale. I mean, the war has been an extraordinary war. It has evolved from, in the early stages, being a rather like World War I and World War II with tanks and so forth, and now it's almost a virtual war now on the Eastern Front in the Donbass. Conducted almost entirely by drones, increasingly by AI, increasingly it's going to be autonomous as well. I mean, Ukraine now says that they try not to deploy too many people at all in what they call the 5-kilometer kill zone. So this is turning into a very, very different sort of war, and one actually which over time will favor Ukraine, because the great advantage Russia has had is manpower, just vast numbers of people who they've been throwing into the meat grinder. But manpower is now no longer the critical factor.
Tim, let me ask you about how this war has evolved, because yes, we know that this war is being fought primarily by drone warfare and missile strikes that keep coming from both sides. Yet, over the past few years, Ukraine has been asking for fighter jets. Allies took a very long time to grant that request, but in the end, certain did have provided Ukraine fighter jets. Have those jets been used, and have they been impactful?
Well, as you rightly say, the war has evolved. I mean, if you remember, just before the fighter jet issue, there was the whole question of the tanks, the Leopard tanks, the Challenger tanks, and so forth. And actually, tanks are now not proving to be particularly important. So what we now need, what Europe now needs to do, is really ramp up its supply of what Ukraine needs. That's missiles, that's ammunition, that's money. That's what was announced this morning, which I think would be very good, which is an early EU accession. So there's a lot that Europe can do, and it needs to start do more about targeting Russia's economy, particularly this sort of shadow fleet of oil tankers, which go through the Baltic and go through the English Channel, completely, pretty much unmolested at the moment. There's a lot more that Europe can do on this.
I mean,
And to sort of fill the hole that in a sense, President Trump has withdrawn.
I mean, the Americans have taken a step back. Clearly, they're happy with supplying the weaponry just as long as they're not paying for it. I want to ask about something that the Kremlin said earlier today, that its war goals have not been achieved yet. Given that that's the thinking over in Moscow, then is there any point to get these two sides to the negotiating table?
Well, it's one of these sort of fake negotiations. I've seen a number of them over the years as a diplomat, where I mean, what Zelensky is desperately trying to do is making sure that he appears very determined on the negotiations and is not the first one to walk away. No one wants to be the first one to walk away. But the truth of the matter is, this isn't a serious negotiation. The 28-point plan was basically drafted largely in Moscow. About 20 of the 28 plans, 20 of the 28 points lean very, very heavily towards Moscow. As you rightly say, Putin doesn't want to stop the war because he thinks he's winning, and he thinks he's within reach of at least winning the Donbass provinces. And Zelensky, of course, cannot afford to give away territory which Russia has not yet conquered. So the talks are really a performative demonstration. They're not serious negotiations. I mean, there are some serious aspects to it, such as release of prisoners and so forth. The fundamental point, bringing the war to the end, is I assess we are absolutely no closer.
Will there have to be some territorial concessions, in your opinion, for this war to stop?
Well, I think Crimea will almost certainly be a territorial concession. I think it's arguable that parts of the Donbass may be lost de facto, not necessarily de jure, by Ukraine. But no, absolutely not. They cannot afford to give up territory which Russia has not yet conquered, not least because on that territory are some of their best constructed defensive installations. So if they were to give up that territory, they would then find themselves in undefended territory, on the other side of the Dnipro River. And no, this isn't a situation which Ukraine wants to find itself in.
Okay, Tim, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us on the program today. That was Tim Willasey-Wilsey there.